Let us take hands and walk together through the drifting smoke of an aftermath. Our feet leave red prints as we tread from ponds of blood. The ponds will dry one day, plentiful as they are. Will you remember the fall of mankind as a blessing or as a curse? Or won't you remember it at all? Someday, friend, we'll see. Until then, discover the delight of drawing with Dolores. Greetings, listeners. Spring has sprung forth and given way to the hot, hot heat of summer. To celebrate all the nature exploding around us, I'm going to teach you how to draw a rose. So, take a pencil and some paper, and let's grab our listening spades and dig right into the lesson. Okay. So first, we're going to draw some lines to use as guides for the petals. So in the middle of your paper, as big as you want, I want you to draw a large X. 2 diagonal lines crossing, okay? Now, in the middle of the X, I want you to draw a vertical line the same length as the lines of your X. Okay? Now, going across what now looks like an asterisk, I draw a horizontal line through the middle. All right. Those are our guidelines. Now, this part is easier than it sounds, but it requires a lot of drawing. So I want you to take your pencil and, starting from the center, connect each of the lines with little droopy horizontal lines, spiraling outward. Okay? But don't close off your droopy lines when you get to the end. Take that last droopy line and connect it up higher on that asterisk line on the guideline there. And then we're going to do it again, but spaced a little further apart from our original droopy lines. So spiraling droopy lines. And then do it again. Just keep going, spiraling outward with your droopy lines until you've finished. And those are your petals. You see, it was a lot easier than it looked. And then now for a bonus, to add some extra detail there, you could draw a critter in there somewhere, like a butterfly that has landed in the middle of the rose. I'm not going to tell you how to draw a butterfly this lesson. That will be another lesson. And there we go for now. Just draw whatever bug you can draw. I went with a butterfly in the middle of my, well, it doesn't quite look like a beautiful rose, but it, well, it's not like I know what a rose looks like. I never get any, which is fine. I don't even like roses. Story time, everyone. Story time. James met Julie immediately out of college when he scored a job as a crematory operator. Julie was his boss's daughter and a talented groundskeeper besides. Julie adored James' darkly romantic aesthetic and the respect with which he handled the bodies of the departed. James admired Julie's care with the landscaping and her sketches of the Angel of Death. He proposed to her by the eternal fountain of Lily Grove Memorial Park and Mortuary. They were 25. Their wedding took place under the stars before the mausoleum of some 19th century physician's family. It was beautiful. Julie's mother cried,
And as she fed Wonder Bread to the cemetery swans, James and Julie each said their vows, which contained only the following words: "You'll know what to do." James and Julie fell in love at an age when magic and death are romantic notions, real and unreal in equal measure. In their youthful passion within a ring of Halloween store candles, they swore that if one of them should die, the other would do everything in their power to resurrect them. They had searched endlessly through local listings before they found a woman claiming she could do the job. Her business name was Esme the Seer, but she accepted checks made out to Nicky Oldman. She operated out of an abandoned department store, but seemed knowledgeable enough. She took their payment of $100 and told them to come back in 20 years. That was all. James felt cheated, but Julie told him to be patient. Except they forgot. They grew up. James took over the mortuary, hired a groundskeeper so that Julie could focus on her art. They never had children, but their lives were full and they were very happy. 20 years later, a truck carrying timber lost some of its cargo while James and Julie were driving behind it. James suffered a bruised cheek. Julie died instantly, impaled on a pine log. The truck never stopped. There were no other cars on the road but James. James tried to dial 911, but his hands were shaking too badly, and then his wedding flashed before his eyes. He remembered how beautiful Julie had been. He remembered their vows. Then he remembered the words of Esme the Seer. "Come back in 20 years, she had said. James removed all identification from his car and pushed it into the woods. Then he carried Julie's body 2 miles to the mortuary, where he kept her in a freezer while he gathered his courage. No one could know she had died. She'd be back soon, he told himself. He also told himself this was crazy, but it was too late now. James wrapped Julie's body in a tarp and placed her in the trunk of their second car, which had been hers. This he took to the place where they had once met Esme the Seer. He hoped beyond hope that the woman who once squatted there could be found there still. The property had since been replaced with a high-end shopping center. But at the top of the shopping center was a jewelry and crystal store called, of course, Oldman & Bone. He didn't even bother to check before carrying Julie's body to those glass double doors with their gleaming brass handles. And though it was well after midnight now, Nicky Oldman, once Esme the Seer, was waiting for him. She looked the same apart from a streak of gray in her hair that didn't look natural. "I did all right with your $100, didn't I?" she said with a sneer. Then she ushered him inside with a warning of, "Don't get her fluids on any of my shit." Nicky didn't bother to explain. James didn't bother to ask. In a back room that seemed made for this sort of thing, she took a strange knife with a bone handle and split open those last few strings of tissue and bone still connected in Julie's chest. Then she pulled the broken ribs apart with remarkable strength. The crack made James think of Thanksgiving turkey, while into the cavity, Nicky stuffed chunks of Julie's own hair, a sliver of flesh from her calf, and bits of her broken bones. James watched without any sense of horror. These pieces being cut, torn and broken from his wife's body, they were merely ingredients. His wife wasn't dead to him at all, but waiting for him to make the coffee before she'd get out of bed. When it was done, Nicky sewed up the hole in Julie's corpse with some kind of twine that didn't look like it would hold. But what did James know? She gave him a list of instructions and rules after that. There were always rules, she said. Keep her in a warm place, be patient, don't let your blood mingle, that sort of thing. She said death will be looking for her. She said, I wouldn't do whatever it was you were doing when she died the first time. James nodded, wrapped Julie back up in the tarp, took her back to the mortuary where he carefully laid her out on a table and kept her by the furnace for warmth. And he waited. For days he waited, but there was no change except that Julie's body continued to rot, and James began to rethink his decision. This was the fantasy of a young fool, not a grown man. It would never have worked. And now he'd have to explain what happened to Julie, but how could he? How could he explain this? She left him, he'd say. No one would believe that. She'd gone to study art abroad for a while, or she'd gone overseas for a surgery she couldn't get here. He'd think it through later. For now, he had to put her to rest. This was madness. He should never have to incinerate his own bride, but he'd brought this upon himself. He had just closed the door on the cremator when a text message lit up his phone. Julie's brother, Sam. Could he talk, he wanted to know. There was trouble at home, he said, and Julie always knew what to say, but she wasn't answering her phone. James replied without thinking. She's in Europe, he wrote, taking a painting course, probably asleep at this hour. But that wasn't enough for Sam. Thought you two just came back from a conference, he said. James had to think quickly. Yes, he said, and she had to leave first thing this morning. She told me she just landed in Zurich. That was an hour ago." There was no reply for a while, so James foolishly added, "I'm working at the moment. We can talk later if you like." Sam immediately began typing, and James' anxiety ate through his insides. Here he was, burning his own beloved's corpse, hiding it from her brother as if he'd done it to her himself. He stared at the phone screen until the letters began to blur, cursing himself the whole time, until the little dots of Sam's ensuing accusation stopped their incessant rotation. But then, a message. It wasn't an accusation at all. It was worse. "Mind if I come to the office?" said Sam. "No," thought James, but Sam went on. "I won't get in the way, just don't want to be home right now." What could James say but yes? 20 minutes later, James and his brother-in-law sat across from one another in the mortuary parlor, listening to the grandfather clock count the words they weren't saying. "So, she's really serious, isn't she?" Sam said at last. Said James. "About the whole art thing. I mean, it just seems like whenever she's really serious about something, she never says a word about it, like she's afraid she'll jinx it." "Oh," said James with a forced laugh. "Yes, she always was that way, wasn't she? Is still that way." Sam's body relaxed and he laughed again. "Like when she met you. We didn't have the faintest idea who you were until she announced you were in..." A loud groan from outside interrupted him. Sam's eyes grew wide. His mouth started to form the word "what?" when another groan sounded and rose to the volume of a wail, a distinctly human sound. James abruptly stood. "Sorry," he said, "I've got to check something." He moved toward the back door. His thoughts were of the crematorium, only of the crematorium, but the source of the wail was not in the crematorium. Not anymore. Julie, bald, naked, and covered in blood, threw open the door and stood there staring at the two men. Her eyes were black holes. Her teeth were clenched. James was thinking of how her face looked younger than it used to, but Sam had begun to scream. He was pointing at the floor and shrieking for James to call an ambulance. James looked down and saw what was the matter. At Julie's ankles, an entire body's worth of skin dragged on the floor. Bits of crushed bone lined the inside of those gray mounds of flesh. "Oh, sweetheart," James murmured. Julie had always taken pride in her long dark hair, but now it lay matted with brains and blood in a knotted mass, as if his wife had shed her old skin and been born anew. Sam was shrieking, and now Julie was covering her ears in evident pain. Her eyes rolled around wildly, and she was hissing like a cat. James turned around to try and calm his brother-in-law, to tell him that everything could be explained if he'd only calm down, but in mere seconds the new Julie had sprinted across the room, grabbed her brother by his neck, and ripped his head from his shoulders. James stood in stunned silence as Julie dropped the head and rubbed her ears, pouting. Then she sat on the floor beside her own shed skin and the headless body of her brother. She looked up at James and smiled, said nothing. It was a strange thing that James felt then. It wasn't fear. It wasn't disgust. It was simply disappointment. "Julie," he said calmly. But she did not respond to her own name. He knelt beside her and took her hand, but she did not seem to register this affection, merely allowing her hand to lie limply in his. She was responsive to nothing at all, living entirely in whatever strange world existed in her undead mind, until the grandfather clock began to chime. Instantly her face contorted into rage and her hands flew to her ears. Okay, James said softly, moving swiftly to the clock. "I'm stopping it. There, you see? I'm stopping the noise." And the creature that was his wife became calm once more. But this creature wasn't his wife, had never been. His wife lay attached to its ankles, as dead as she should have been left. James sat back in his chair and watched the thing sitting there before him. She had to die. She had to die again. But could she? Could he watch this happen again? Suppose she died forever and he had to live with the knowledge of everything that had occurred. What then? James remembered the last warning of Nicky Oldman, the part about death looking for Julie. "I wouldn't do whatever it was you were doing when she died the first time." Yes, that was exactly what he had to do. And this time they would both be waiting for death. Julie, or whatever the thing that looked like Julie was, responded well to enough sedative to fell a horse. This was the only way James could place her in the passenger seat of her own car, the only way he'd be able to drive her to the place where it all happened. His plan, if another lumber truck didn't happen along, was to drive the car into the biggest tree he could find at the greatest speed Julie's Fiat could manage. Another lumber truck didn't happen along. But 15 minutes later, James carried out his plan. The Fiat was crushed. His legs were cut from his body. The Julie thing had been thrown headfirst through the windshield, only to be thrown back again without its head. James, in his waning consciousness, felt a little sadness, but the sadness was overwhelmed by relief. He turned his head to look at his passenger. There. All quiet again, he whispered. And with a bloody hand, he stroked Julie's headless neck, their blood mingling in a kind of embrace. As the edges around James' eyesight began to dim, he heard an infernal noise, a sound that ate away at his last moments of life and replaced them with dread. It was the scream that chilled him most, a scream muffled at first, heard from Julie's direction. In the blur of his fading vision, James saw his once beautiful wife's headless shoulders quaking. Blood began to pour down the stump of her neck with renewed force. The flesh tore as some bulbous shape pushed its way up from her chest. Her hands clawed desperately at her own destroyed throat until something wriggled up from it like a newborn infant. And the infant, in this case, was a head. Not Julie's head, no. The one that looked remarkably like James' own, with a full beard stained with Julie's blood and Julie's tissues and pieces of Julie's bones. The screams he had heard were his. Not his exactly, but those of his doppelganger, birthed from his wife's once reborn and now badly battered frame. James' last sensations on earth were of agony, and for the first time true horror. Horror at what he saw now, horror at what was to come. As his diabolical twin shrieked and moaned, the real James' last words were only this: "I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do."
My, oh my, what a disaster!
You're telling me. Some people should leave well enough alone.
No, I mean your fingernails. When was the last time you had a manicure?
Oh, I don't have time for that sort of thing, not with all the cleaning I have to do.
You mean to tell me you aren't using Dandifine for all your housework?
How is that little bottle of powder going to help me with the housework?
In every way imaginable. Just sprinkle it on any surface and wipe it down with a damp cloth, and that surface will be as white as snow. Plus, with Dandifine's pep-giving vitamins H and Z, you don't have to worry about getting it on your hands.
Did you say vitamins H and Z?
I sure did. Here, try some on your countertop.
Well, okay. Say, my countertop is white as snow, but there used to be avocado green. And what happened to my summer tan? That doesn't seem natural.
That's Dandifine.
Good evening, Myrnites, and I know you're out there. This is Reverend Myrna coming at you live from Gethsemane Baptist at the top of the midnight hour. Now, before we get started tonight, I have a little surprise for y'all. I've been working on a brand new theme song for my show, and I think she's ready to unveil. What do you think, Elvis? Should we cue her up? All right, then. Out of the darkness, into the night, steps a figure, cloaked in deep purple light. Bathed in flickering neon, she's been training for the fight, to bring you the word of God's mighty, awesome might.
I'm scheming for a demon. Lord, I'm scheming for a demon redeeming Reverend Myrna.
Whew, boy, that was a rabble-rouser, wasn't it? I wrote and performed that little number all by myself, something that's just getting harder and harder to do in time for our regular broadcast these days. Lord help me, but the babies who sleep in the sanctuary have started leaving for the nightly hunt later and later anymore. Used to be they'd start waking up, screeching and messing around at a half hour to 12. You could set your watch by it. Now, I don't know if it's daylight savings time, which I still observe, or if they're evolving, or what the heck the deal is, but it's been 11:45 they get up now, and tonight it was 5 till, which is why I'm a few minutes later than usual. And listeners, that really chaps my hide, you know it? It really... Well, let's just get into it, because the subject of tonight's preaching hour is routine. R-O-U-T-I-N-E, routine. That's right. We need routine. God has given us the very idea of routine so that we might worship Him on time. He's a very busy God, and particularly in these dark times, routine is the key to keeping us sane. I mean, I don't know where you folks are holed up, but over here at the Gethsemane Baptist building, I don't know who's outside the door at any point in time. Probably not human, I'll tell you that. Most likely, not even Presbyterian. So I can either live in fear and sit here huddled up inside this minister's office thinking about how the world has gone to pot, and it has, or I can get out there and I can get busy with my chores. There's food to find, there's weapons to make. I can't sit in the shadows and wait for these things when the babies are on the move. Genesis chapter 2, verse 15 says, and I apologize, but the only Bible I got in here right now is the Teens Wow translation from 1996. Genesis 2:15, the big boss upstairs put Adam in the Garden of Eden and said, I got you a job taking care of my yard. Now, Adam didn't have to worry about a mortgage. There were no colleges to put his kids through. They didn't have dentists to pay. Boy, that's starting to sound familiar, isn't it? Adam's tasks weren't about earning money. This was a brand new world, and God wanted Adam to get busy and get used to it. Keep him busy. It's what the Lord wants us to do. We're living in a brand new world ourselves, listeners. A time when it's no longer safe to be outdoors without a weapon. A time when it's no longer safe to be indoors without a weapon. A time when weapons themselves cannot necessarily be trusted, depending on whether they are man-made or built by the scaly hands of the demon regime who govern this world at all times, or so they think, Myrnites, so they think. And you better believe me, they are out there marauding. Celebrating. It's more like it. They are celebrating the end of the human reign, celebrating the hopelessness we survivors feel, at least I assume. I have not yet encountered a survivor, but I myself do not feel hopeless. No, my hope is as strong as an ox. Did I give up hope when acid rained down from the heavens? No. I made a hat. Out of those neoprene koozies I got stockpiled all those years donating to the classical station. The newsman said, people, you gotta get neoprene fabric, and old Myrna thought about those koozies, and she thought, aha! And I made a hat. I carried on, just as you must do. Keep on keeping on, as they used to say, before there was no on to keep on. And that's all the time we have for the show tonight, listeners. Until next time, pleasant dreams, safe shelter, and unhindered breathing for all. This is Reverend Myrna signing off from the music minister's office of Gethsemane Baptist.
And now, ask. Eric writes, there's this girl I like, but I've only met her online. I've been talking to her for a couple of months, but she won't meet me in person. Should I give up or keep trying? I'm starting to wonder if she's even a real person. Dearest Eric, I'm here for you. Under ordinary circumstances, I'd say you should give up and find someone more interested in all the lovely attributes you have to offer, but your concern about her authenticity as a human being struck a chord with me. You see, I've been noticing the goblins too. They're everywhere, and we have to ferret them out. After much trial and error, I've created a test that should help you discover if she's a real human being who simply doesn't want to date you, or if she is, in fact, a goblin. Number 1, ask her what she ate for breakfast. If she tells you she doesn't eat breakfast, she may be a goblin. If she tells you she ate Cheerios with sliced bananas and baby teeth, she's definitely a goblin. Number 2, ask for a new photograph. Ask for her to be holding something that shows the day's date. If she doesn't understand time, she's probably a goblin. If she tells you this is strange and controlling behavior, she's probably just correct. Number 3, tell her she is as beautiful and radiant as the sun. If she's offended, she's a goblin. Goblins don't like the sun. On the other hand, she may just not like the sun, and that's okay. Respect her need for distance from celestial bodies. Number 4, lastly, ask her to describe in single words only the good things that come into her mind about her mother. If she replies in a language you've never seen before, and if the words give you a headache, and if you notice an odor of sulfur, she's a goblin. But even if she is a goblin, Eric, don't let that deter you from dating her. Simply tell her that meeting her in person is important to you. Let her know you won't judge her, and ask nicely that she doesn't eat any of your friends or household pets. I hope this brings you comfort. If any other listeners are struggling on the gallows of the unknown, you may send your questions by writing them down, burning them to ash, and launching the ashes into space, or by sending a letter to ask@goodnightdearmargaret.com. Tell me a story of unspoken feelings. Feelings that burden your heart and trouble your sleep. What sort of feelings were they? Were they anger? Were they love? Were they feelings of pain you believed you could not acknowledge? Did you try to tell someone who would not listen? Did you write a letter you never sent? Did you refuse to commit these feelings to words, even to yourself? What does it feel like in your throat when you think of the one who caused those feelings? Tell me that story. Tell me that story now. And now it's time to go back before we emerge from the blood. I'm sorry that I have to leave you, friend, but thank you for coming along.
Good night, dear Margaret. May angels bring you dreams. And when comes the sun, dear Margaret, we hope they'll allow you to wake.
Goodnight, Dear Margaret is written, produced, and narrated by me, Katy Towell. New episodes are posted monthly with a bonus episode for Patreon patrons. Special thanks go out to Colin Hamilton, Chaz Simmons, and Rooney for your support. To learn more, including how to subscribe and support the podcast, visit goodnightdearmargaret.com.